Hi. Yeah, I'm quite nervous as well. This is the first time I've spoken about my diagnosis, really. It's quite recent. It's just a couple of months ago. I was going to start with a passage and then sort of let some of my writing lead it. She is relieved when the dinner is over, when they get home and she can take her smart clothes off and sit in bed in just her t-shirt and pants. She throws her skirt and blouse on the floor, not even in the laundry basket. She knows she should hang them up so they don't get creased, but she can't be bothered. So that's probably an experience we've all had. You know, there's something really small but that should be done, but it just can't be asked. And I'm sure everyone can identify, but to me now, reading that, I see signs of my ADHD. And the reason I kind of wanted to talk about it was because it's become such a hot topic, you know, that we've heard it quite a lot. You know, everyone's being diagnosed with neurodivergence. There's been a panorama program about it, sort of questioning. And having the diagnosis myself has made me think, you know, is this real? What's going on? And sort of, you know, it's quite a strange process. This book I started writing in 2015, so it was before I even had any kind of thoughts of me being neurodivergent or anything like that. So it's not a book about neurodivergence. It's a book that I wrote when I found myself a trailing spouse in Singapore, which I hated. And it is quite a psychological book. It's a sort of study of someone who is me, but obviously isn't me. It's a fictional book. And it goes some dark places, so trigger warning if you're gonna read it. There's some violence and some death in it. But what's interesting is that there's a lot of psychological observations of this character, which is kind of an alter ego. And I guess these traits, like, you know, I should hang something up, but I couldn't be bothered, that we all have. And people say, well, we all do that. But I heard someone say, and I think this is a really good analogy, well, we all need to pee, right? But if you have to go and pee 60 times a day, that's problematic, and that is going to influence your life. So it's not like the traits of neurodivergence are necessarily so different that, you know, it's a human experience, but it's when it starts interfering with your life to a certain extent that we start talking about neurodivergence. Right. She hates supermarkets. She can cope with supermarkets if she's feeling well, but any underlying malaise, physical or mental, seems to be intensified, brought to the surface by the glare of the fluorescent lights of the supermarket. The bigger the supermarket, the worse it is. The excessive walking needed to locate items, together with the excessive choice of products, and the inevitability of at least one particular item she's after being sold out, is devastating to her digestive and nervous system. If she's with him, which is not that often, she almost always needs the loo. She gets stomach cramps and cold sweats and has to locate the conveniences immediately. When she's alone, it's a deep hopelessness that grabs hold of her. There is no relief for that. So I wanted to also say something about how ADHD is terribly named. And of course, I thought of it as, you know, until very recently, of boys, you know, at the back of the class being unruly, teenage boys, and that certainly wasn't ever me. I was never, you know, I was quite a quiet child in many ways. And it's not, first of all, the hyperactivity that doesn't necessarily exist in the way that we imagine it, and also the attention deficit. The deficit is the wrong word totally. It's even more of a attention, or it's too much attention. It's a way of not being able to direct attention. It's a lack of filter, and that's both for inner stimulus and outer stimulus. So like in the supermarket passage, I've realized that, you know, it's just so much stimulus that I can't filter out, and that actually has a physical sort of impact on me. And it's super tiring. It's super tiring trying to filter something out that you can't. And that often leads to fatigue. So a lot of people with ADHD aren't hyperactive because they're tired all the time. And that was certainly true for me, you know, and I always thought, well, how can I have a hyperactive disorder if I'm tired all the time? I guess, is that sometimes something happens, right? And I will read you another passage. And bear with me, this is a bit weird. She starts with the liver. She pours the dark red blood into a Tupperware container and places a piece on the chopping board. She takes the kitchen knife out of the rack and the sharpener out of a drawer and sharpens the knife, passing it, heel to tip, over two steel rods in plastic casing of the sharpener. She starts with a piece of liver, a rough oval in shape. She cuts a couple of 1 centimetre slices of the side, then chops these into small squares which she places in a plastic container with the blood. The liver is dark and silky and cuts easily, oozing a little liquid. It smells like steel. There is something about cutting meat which is just more interesting than chopping vegetables. She's done with the liver and she cuts open the packet of beef lung. There is less liquid in it and it's watery pink. She's fascinated by these things that were alive. She places the lung, a similar shape and size to the initial piece of liver but thicker, on the chopping board. Again, she slices it first, then chops. But the lung is not so easy to cut. It's uneven in texture, spongy, with membranes and crunchy bronchioles growing through it. She thinks about the animal to which this lung once belonged. It lived by this ingenious organ, inspiring air into those crunchy tubes, the strange foamy flesh extracting oxygen, releasing carbon dioxide, and expelling it through the tubules. Now it's dead meat. So sometimes this hyper focus happens where all the attention goes to something, and often something you don't want to pay attention to or don't necessarily need to pay attention to. But that is a kind of magic, and I think that's, to me, what made me realize is actually made me a good writer and a researcher. I used to be an academic, and going down rabbit holes after pieces of information, I could do that for hours. But it was also making me a writer because the observation, the kind of sitting there and looking at these things and then making these connections, starting to think about the animal, and often making connections that are quite lateral, which is exactly this thing that if you're not paying it full attention to something, if other things are constantly knocking on the window of your attention, you make connections that you probably wouldn't do otherwise if you were just directed in one thing.